She was found on the floor of her own classroom, rain drumming against the windows like a funeral march. The boy who killed her was 17 years old, trembling in the corner, his hands stained with her blood. On the desk beside her body, there was a note, smeared with crimson, that read only 3 words. "You promised me." It was supposed to be a quiet evening in Maple Ridge, a town where everyone knew everyone, where Friday night meant high school football and Sunday morning meant church. But when officers arrived at Ridgefield High that night, they found a scene that would haunt the town for decades. A respected teacher, dead, a 17-year-old student, covered in blood, and a secret so forbidden it would tear a community apart. Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. No one could explain what still keeps investigators awake at night was why she smiled right before she died. Maple Ridge sits tucked between rolling hills and pine forests in northern Washington, the kind of town where people still leave their doors unlocked and kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. Population 3,200, 1 high school, 1 library, 2 churches. It's the kind of place where a scandal doesn't just ripple through the community, it drowns it. Melissa Carter was 33 years old when she died. To her students, she was more than a teacher. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, who stayed after school to help struggling kids, who made Shakespeare feel less like homework and more like therapy. She had auburn hair that caught the light when she laughed, a warm smile that made you feel seen, and a gentleness that drew people in. But beneath that warmth was a loneliness she tried desperately to hide. Her marriage had ended badly the year before, her ex-husband leaving her for someone younger, someone who didn't spend her evenings grading essays and worrying about her students. Melissa threw herself into her work because it was easier than going home to an empty house. And that's where she met Ethan Miller. Ethan was 17, a senior at Ridgefield High, quiet in the way that made teachers pay attention. He was the kid who sat in the back corner sketching in the margins of his notebook, who wrote poetry that made you feel something, even if you didn't fully understand it. He was talented, sensitive, and deeply lonely. His father had left when he was 12, disappearing one night without explanation, leaving Ethan and his mother to fend for themselves. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, which meant Ethan spent most of his time alone. He didn't have many friends. He didn't go to parties. He just kept his head down, drew his pictures, and tried to make it through. When Melissa noticed him, really noticed him, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She saw potential in him, raw and beautiful. He saw salvation in her, someone who finally understood. What started as mentorship, as after-school talks about college applications and creative writing, soon blurred into something else. Their first mistake wasn't falling in love. It was believing no one would notice. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what they both told themselves. Melissa began staying after school to help Ethan with his college essays. He wanted to go to art school, but his mother couldn't afford it, and his grades weren't quite good enough for a full scholarship. Melissa believed in him, maybe more than he believed in himself. She proofread his applications, wrote him glowing recommendation letters, and spent hours talking to him about his future. At first it was just academics, but then it became personal. Ethan started opening up about his father, about the nights he still waited by the window, hoping to see his dad's truck pull into the driveway. Melissa listened in a way no one else ever had. She told him about her divorce, about the shame she felt, about how lonely it was to go home to silence every night. They understood each other in a way that felt rare, almost sacred. The late-night texts started in October. At first, they were about assignments, questions about symbolism in Gatsby or feedback on a poem he'd written, but then they shifted. "Are you okay?" She'd text him at 11 at night. "Not really," he'd reply. "Want to talk?" And they would for hours about everything and nothing, about dreams and fears and the weight of feeling invisible. By November, they'd met outside of school for the first time. A coffee shop 2 towns over, far enough that no one from Maple Ridge would see them. They sat in a corner booth, and for 2 hours they talked like equals, like friends, like something more. She laughed at his jokes. He noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. When they said goodbye that night, there was a moment, just a heartbeat, where they both lingered, where something unspoken passed between them. In those quiet moments, under dim cafe lights, she forgot who she was, and he forgot who he wasn't supposed to love. But every secret burns brighter before it burns out. And just when they thought no one knew, someone was already watching. The first whisper came in early December. A student noticed Ethan waiting by Melissa's car after school, leaning against the hood like he belonged there. It was nothing, really, just a moment, but in a small town, moments become stories. By the end of the week, half the junior class was talking about it. Did you see them together? She gives him rides home all the time. I heard they went to a coffee shop. The rumors spread like wildfire, fed by suspicion and boredom and the thrill of gossip. Most students didn't think much of it, just a teacher being nice, but a few started paying closer attention. They noticed how Melissa's face lit up when Ethan walked into class, how he always stayed behind to talk to her, how they seemed to have their own private language of glances and smiles. Then came the note. It was slipped under the principal's door one Monday morning, anonymous, typed in plain black letters. She's crossing lines. The principal, a stern woman named Mrs. Hargrove, didn't want to believe it. Melissa was one of her best teachers, respected, loved by students and staff alike. But she couldn't ignore the note. She had to investigate. Melissa was called into the office on a Wednesday afternoon. Mrs. Hargrove asked her directly, "Is there anything inappropriate happening between you and Ethan Miller?" Melissa's heart stopped, but her face stayed calm. "Of course not," she said, her voice steady. "He's a good student. I'm helping him with his college applications, that's all." Mrs. Hargrove studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Because if there were, you know the consequences." Melissa nodded, thanked her, and walked out of the office with her hands trembling. That night she deleted every text message she'd ever sent Ethan. She blocked his number. She told herself it was over, that she'd been foolish, that she had to protect herself. But Ethan didn't understand. When she stopped responding to his texts, when she avoided him in the hallways, when she wouldn't meet his eyes in class, he felt abandoned all over again. And then, one photo changed everything. A student snapped a picture at the coffee shop, blurred and distant, but clear enough to show Melissa and Ethan sitting too close, her hand resting on his across the table. The photo was posted online with a caption, "When your teacher plays favorites." Within 2 days, it had been shared across the school, across the town, across Facebook groups and parent chats. The rumor wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was everywhere. The school board called an emergency meeting. Parents demanded answers. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't anyone stopped it sooner? What kind of school allowed this to happen? Mrs. Hargrove had no choice but to act. Melissa was called in again, this time with 2 board members present. They showed her the photo. She stared at it, her stomach twisting, and said nothing for a long time. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were just talking. He's going through a hard time. I was trying to help." They didn't believe her, but they didn't have proof either. The photo was circumstantial. There were no texts, no emails, no witnesses to anything explicitly inappropriate. Ethan was questioned too. He sat in a small office, hands folded in his lap, and told them the same thing Melissa had. "She's just my teacher. She's helping me with college, that's all." For a moment it seemed like they might escape punishment. The investigation stalled. The rumors continued, but without evidence, there was nothing the school could do. Melissa was suspended for a week, pending further review, but she was told she could return. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt trapped. The guilt ate at her, not because she'd done something wrong, she told herself, but because she'd allowed herself to care too much. She started avoiding Ethan completely, ignoring his desperate notes slipped under her classroom door, his texts from burner phones begging her to talk to him. It wasn't the questions that broke her. It was the silence that followed. Ethan felt the rejection like a physical wound. He'd opened up to her, trusted her, loved her, and now she was gone. The one person who'd ever made him feel seen had vanished, and he didn't understand why. That's when he started keeping a journal, pouring his heart onto pages, trying to make sense of the chaos inside him. And what he wrote inside would later become Exhibit A. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The journal was found later, leather-bound and filled with Ethan's cramped handwriting, pages and pages of raw, unfiltered emotion. Some entries were love letters, desperate declarations of how much Melissa meant to him, how she was the only person who'd ever understood him. But as the weeks went on, the tone shifted. "She's ignoring me," one entry read. "After everything we shared, she just threw me away like I'm nothing." Another, "She promised me we'd figure this out together. She lied." And then, darker still, "If she won't be mine, no one else can have her." Melissa had no idea how far Ethan had fallen. She was dealing with her own unraveling. The town had turned on her. Parents pulled their kids from her class. Colleagues stopped talking to her in the staff room. She started receiving anonymous letters, slipped into her mailbox, under her windshield wipers, taped to her classroom door. They all said the same thing. "You promised me." She didn't know who was sending them. She assumed it was someone trying to scare her, maybe a parent, maybe a student playing a cruel prank. She started locking her classroom door, even during the day. She jumped at every sound. She stopped sleeping. The school board met again in late January and decided to suspend her indefinitely, pending a full investigation. Melissa knew what that meant. Her career was over. Her reputation was destroyed. Everything she'd worked for, gone. And for what? For caring too much? For being lonely? For letting a vulnerable boy get too close? She sat in her empty classroom one afternoon, staring at the rows of desks, the posters on the walls, the books she'd collected over the years, and wondered if any of it had been worth it. But while everyone suspected her, no one realized she was the one in danger. Friday night, February 14th, Valentine's Day. The rain started just after sunset, a cold, steady drizzle that turned into a downpour by 8 o'clock. Melissa was alone at Ridgefield High, staying late to finish grading papers, trying to keep herself busy so she wouldn't think about how empty her house felt. She heard the door creak open around 9:30. She looked up, startled, and saw Ethan standing in the doorway, soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes red and swollen. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharp, "you can't be here." "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice breaking. "Please." "No," she said, standing up, backing toward the window. "You need to leave. Now." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You promised me," he said, and his voice was so raw, so full of pain, that for a moment she felt her resolve crack. "I promised you nothing," she said, trying to sound firm. "You were my student. That's all." "That's not true," he said, his voice rising. "You said you understood me. You said I wasn't alone. You said we'd figure it out." "I was trying to help you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But this, us, it was wrong. It was always wrong." "Don't say that," he said, stepping closer. "Don't say it meant nothing." "It has to mean nothing," she said. "It's over, Ethan. It has to be over." The room was silent except for the rain hammering against the windows. Ethan stood there, trembling, his fists clenched at his sides. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "I've already lost everything else." "You haven't lost anything," she said, her voice softening. "You have your whole life ahead of you." You'll go to college. You'll find people who love you. You'll forget all about this." "I'll never forget you," he said. And then he moved toward her, reaching out, and she stepped back, panicking, pushing him away. It wasn't hard. She didn't mean to hurt him, but he stumbled, caught off balance, and his hand shot out to steady himself, grabbing her arm, pulling her with him. They both fell, crashing into the desk, books and papers scattering across the floor. In a moment of panic and heartbreak, one push, one instant, changed everything. Melissa's head hit the corner of the desk with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the floor, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. Ethan scrambled to her, kneeling beside her, his hands shaking as he reached for her. "Melissa," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Melissa, please." She looked up at him, her vision blurring, and for just a moment she smiled. Not a happy smile, a sad, knowing smile, the smile of someone who'd seen this coming all along. And then she was gone. Ethan sat there, holding her hand, whispering her name over and over, until the police arrived 20 minutes later and found him still there, trembling, tears streaming down his face, repeating the same words. "You promised me." The sirens cut through the rain, red and blue lights painting the walls of Ridgefield High in harsh, flickering colors. Officers rushed into the classroom and found Ethan on the floor, cradling Melissa's lifeless body, rocking back and forth, whispering her name like a prayer. They had to pry him away from her. He didn't resist. He just collapsed, sobbing, his hands covered in her blood. One officer asked him what happened, and Ethan, his voice barely audible, said, "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to talk to her. I just wanted her to listen." He confessed on the spot, right there in the classroom, tearfully admitting everything, the relationship, the texts, the meetings, the desperation that had driven him there that night. By morning, the entire town knew. Maple Ridge erupted in shock, grief, and anger. How had this happened? How had no one stopped it sooner? Parents demanded accountability. Students cried in the hallways. Teachers struggled to explain the unexplainable. The media descended like vultures, satellite trucks parked outside the school, reporters shoving microphones in the faces of anyone willing to talk. Headlines screamed across the country. Teacher killed by student after secret affair. Forbidden love ends in tragedy. High school romance turns deadly. But it wasn't romance. It wasn't love. It was something far more complicated, far more tragic. Melissa's mother, a frail woman in her 60s, appeared on the news, her voice shaking as she said, "My daughter was a good person. She made a mistake, but she didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." Ethan's mother defended him in court, her face pale and drawn, her voice desperate as she told the judge, "He's just a boy. He didn't mean to hurt her. He loved her." The trial began in April, 3 months after Melissa's death. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Students testified, describing the way Melissa and Ethan had looked at each other, the way they'd lingered after class. Teachers testified, saying they'd noticed something off but hadn't wanted to believe it. And then came the evidence. Ethan's phone, recovered by police, revealed months of deleted messages that forensic analysts had managed to restore. Texts that showed the depth of their emotional entanglement, the blurred lines between mentorship and something more. A voice note surfaced, recorded weeks before Melissa's death, her voice soft and sad as she said, "We both know this can't last, Ethan. We both know how this ends." And Ethan's last text to her, sent the morning of the day she died, read simply, "Then it ends tonight." For Maple Ridge, this wasn't just a crime. It was a mirror, reflecting how fragile trust can be, how easily good intentions can turn into something unrecognizable. But what came out in court was darker than anyone imagined. During the trial, Ethan's defense attorney argued that he'd been manipulated, that Melissa, as the adult, had held all the power, that he was a victim too. The prosecution argued the opposite, that Ethan had become obsessed, that his journals revealed a dangerous fixation, that Melissa had tried to end things and he'd refused to let her go. The truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in between. Melissa had crossed a line, no question. She'd allowed emotional intimacy to grow into something inappropriate, something that violated every ethical boundary of her profession. But she'd also tried to stop it, tried to pull away, tried to protect both of them from the consequences. Ethan had been vulnerable, desperate for connection, for someone to see him, but his vulnerability had twisted into obsession, his love into possession. He'd written in his journal, "If I can't have her, no one can." He'd sent her anonymous letters, tried to frighten her into coming back to him. And when she refused, when she told him it was over, he'd snapped. It wasn't rage that killed her. It was heartbreak that turned into desperation. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was manslaughter, not murder. They believed Ethan hadn't intended to kill her, that it had been an accident born of panic and emotion. But intent didn't matter to Melissa. She was still gone. Ethan was sentenced to 15 years in a juvenile facility, eligible for parole after 10. His mother sobbed in the courtroom. Melissa's mother sat silent, her face a mask of grief. As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, he looked back one last time, his eyes searching the courtroom, as if hoping to see Melissa there, as if hoping this was all a nightmare he could wake up from. Melissa was remembered at her funeral as a teacher who cared too much, who saw the best in people, who gave everything she had to her students. Some called her a victim, others called her reckless, most just called her human. In Maple Ridge, people still talk about her. They say you can hear her classroom door creak on rainy nights, not because it's haunted, but because guilt never really leaves. This story didn't have to end the way it did. If Melissa had set firmer boundaries, if Ethan had found help for his loneliness, if someone, anyone, had intervened sooner, maybe things would have been different. But life doesn't work that way. Tragedies don't announce themselves. They creep in slowly, quietly, until it's too late to stop them. What happened in Maple Ridge wasn't just a story of forbidden love. It was a warning about power, about vulnerability, about the dangerous intersection of loneliness and desperation. Melissa held power over Ethan, whether she acknowledged it or not. She was the adult, the authority figure, the one with the responsibility to say no, and she didn't. Not soon enough, not firmly enough. Ethan, for his part, was a child, legally and emotionally. But even children can cause immense harm when their pain goes unaddressed, when their cries for help are ignored or misunderstood. This wasn't just a story of love and loss. It was a warning about how easily human hearts can blur the line between affection and obsession, between care and control. So let me ask you, because this matters, how would you feel if this happened to someone you loved? If your child, your sibling, your friend, was caught in a relationship like this, would you see them as a victim or a villain? And what would you do to stop it before it was too late? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're necessary ones, because stories like this don't just happen to other people, in other towns. They happen everywhere, quietly, until they explode into tragedy. Melissa Carter was 33 years old when she died. Ethan Miller was 17. Neither of them thought it would end like this. But it did. And now, a town is left to pick up the pieces, to ask the hard questions, to wonder if they could have done something, anything, to stop it. If this story shook you like it did us, let us know your thoughts below. Do you believe this was love or manipulation? Was justice truly served? Could this have been prevented? And if so, how? These are the conversations we need to have, the uncomfortable truths we need to face. If you want more real-life stories that explore the darkest corners of the human heart, stories that make you think, that make you feel, that challenge you to see the world differently, make sure you're subscribed. New episodes drop every week. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for caring enough to ask the hard questions. This story is dedicated to the victims of emotional manipulation and youth violence, to those who've been lost, and to those still searching for a way out.